The truth is hard, but many people are not being defeated by life. They are being defeated by themselves. You work, run, insist, dream, but you remain stuck in the same place, in the same mistakes, in the same results. Not because the world has closed doors, but because you lost control of your own mind, your own decisions, and your own impulses. And the most frightening part? You do not even notice it. Because the habits that are killing your peace, your strength, and your direction seem normal. The book of Proverbs reveals an uncomfortable truth. Whoever does not learn to govern themselves will end up being dragged around by their own mistakes. If your life is not moving forward, maybe the problem is not bad luck, delay, or lack of opportunity. Maybe the problem is that you let control of your life slip out of your hands. And today you are going to understand what you need to do to stay in control of your life. So subscribe to this channel now to receive more videos that will unlock your life. And also comment, "I choose to be in control of my life." That shows your position. Things begin to change when we make a decision. There are people who have potential, talent, drive, and even faith. But even so, they live tired, confused, unproductive, emotionally disorganized, and without direction. These are people who want to win, want to change their lives, want to live with purpose, but in daily life, they continue being dragged around by confused thoughts, unstable emotions, constant distractions, and a routine with no alignment. And the most dangerous part is that this does not always look like destruction. Sometimes it just looks like exhaustion. Sometimes it just looks like a phase. Sometimes it just looks like too much going on. But deep down, what is missing is not just rest, motivation, or opportunity. What is missing is control, inner government, self-control. Because a person can have strength and still lose if they do not know how to lead their own life with wisdom, prudence, and clarity. A lot of people are trying to win on the outside before governing what is happening on the inside. They want to change results, but they do not watch what they think. They want a new life, but they do not correct what they keep repeating. They want victory, but they keep feeding invisible patterns of self-sabotage, emotional laziness, impulsiveness, and living on autopilot. And without realizing it, they let life be directed by impulse, distraction, the wrong environment, poorly thought-out decisions, and lack of discipline. That is why Proverbs was not written just to inspire you. It was written to correct you. It was written to teach a person how to live with direction, responsibility, focus, consistency, correction, and the kind of mindset that does not bow to every wind. Because there is a path that seems right at first, seems comfortable, seems harmless. But in the end, it destroys peace, weakens the soul, and steals years of life. The Bible says in Proverbs 4:23, "Above all else, guard your heart." That means the battle of your life does not begin with money. It does not begin with open doors. It does not begin with circumstances. It begins within. It begins with what you allow to live inside you. It begins with what governs your thoughts, your reactions, your choices, and your habits. And Proverbs 16:32 goes even deeper. "Better is the one who rules their spirit than the one who takes a city." Look how strong that is. The world teaches you to admire external achievements. God teaches you to value internal government. The world calls strong the person who defeats others. Wisdom calls strong the person who can govern themselves. And maybe that is exactly what many people are missing. Not more talent, but more government. Not more hurry, but more prudence. Not more empty promises, but more discipline to sustain what they say they want. So, if your life seems stuck today, do not ignore this truth. Maybe the problem is not lack of value. Maybe it is lack of direction. Maybe you are trying to build a victorious life with a disorganized mind, emotions in charge, misaligned habits, and without realizing how much that is delaying you. But that can begin to change today. Because winning in life does not begin on the outside. It begins when you stop living on autopilot and decide to take back control of what you think, feel, do, and repeat. And that is exactly what you are going to understand in this video. Understand this. You did not lose your strength, you lost your direction. There are people who look at their own lives and think, I think I lost my strength. But most of the time, it was not strength that disappeared. It was direction. And that changes everything, because when a person loses direction, they begin to interpret exhaustion as weakness, confusion as inability, and slowness as failure. But the problem is not always lack of power. Sometimes the problem is that you are spending your energy on 10 fronts at the same time, and at the end of the day, you have built nothing solid in any of them. You do move, you do stay busy, you do try, but you live in a kind of autopilot life, reacting to whatever shows up, putting out emotional fires, chasing what is urgent, while what is important keeps being pushed aside. And then a dangerous feeling is born. The feeling that you are trying so hard and still not getting anywhere. That hurts because it makes the person doubt their own ability to win. But let me confront you with care. Maybe your biggest problem today is not laziness, bad luck, or lack of talent. Maybe it is absence of clarity, lack of focus, and a routine with no alignment. You are not without value. You are without an axis. And when your axis disappears, even someone with above-average potential starts living below what they could. Think of a powerful car. Beautiful, strong engine, full tank, everything working. Now imagine that car with no steering wheel. What good is all that power if it cannot be guided? That is exactly what happens to a lot of people. They have ability, they have ideas, they even have a desire to change, but they have no inner government. They do not choose a clear target. They do not sustain a decision. They do not maintain consistency. They do not practice discipline. They do not protect what really matters. So they keep being pulled by distractions, external pressures, comparisons, impulses, and other people's urgencies. And want to know something? That is more exhausting than working hard. Because working hard with purpose strengthens you, but working without direction drains you. It is like rowing and not moving. It is like running on a treadmill, thinking you are crossing a city. Many people do not realize it, but they are living under invisible patterns that sabotage their growth. They start motivated, stop at the first discomfort, change direction in the middle of the journey, get excited by novelty, abandon the process, then go back to blaming themselves. That is self-sabotage disguised as trying. And the worst part is that the person convinces themselves that the problem is life, when in reality, many times, the problem is lack of control over where their own life is going. Without direction, even strength becomes waste. Without an aligned mindset, even good opportunities go unnoticed. That is why the wisdom of Proverbs touches this wound so deeply. When the text points to the importance of looking straight ahead, of not turning to the right or to the left, it is teaching something much deeper than simple visual focus. It is talking about inner posture. It is talking about living with prudence, with decision, with awareness of the path, because whoever does not define their direction ends up being led by the noise. And today's noise is way too loud. Everyone's opinion, constant comparison, too much stimulation, quick promises, empty shortcuts, distractions packaged as opportunity. In that scenario, a person without self-control begins to call disorder freedom. And it is not. Freedom without direction becomes dispersion, and dispersion, over time, becomes frustration. Maybe you have already lived this in practice. You start a project fully committed, spend a few days excited, then the energy drops. Another idea appears, a new concern shows up, and before you know it, what was important has been abandoned. The question is not only, why did I stop? But why do I keep letting what matters get run over? That is the question that changes a life. because it takes you out of the role of victim of confusion and puts you in the field of responsibility. And every real change begins there. Not in drama, not in guilt, but in the moment when you realize, if I do not take direction, anything will keep directing my life for me. In practice, that requires courage to cut out excess, simplify choices, and reorganize your heart. Sometimes the first step to taking back control is not doing more, but stopping what is stealing your energy. Ask yourself sincerely, what is consuming my focus without producing fruit? What area of my life is asking for urgent correction? Where am I confusing busyness with progress? Maybe you need to reduce the number of goals, silence some noise, establish real priorities, and decide what deserves your strength in this season. Because whoever wants victory needs to stop living by improvisation. Whoever wants to win needs to learn how to protect their direction. And that happens through small daily decisions, before opening your phone, knowing what needs to be done, before saying yes to everyone, remembering what God and your conscience have already placed in your hands, before changing plans yet again, evaluating whether it is strategy or just disguised escape. I have seen many people think they needed more motivation when what they really needed was structure. I've seen people asking for an open door, but unable to sustain the routine that door would require. And maybe this is the point that prepares the next step, because after a person realizes they lost direction, they begin to notice something even deeper. It is not just the outside path that is misaligned. Many times the chaos started inside, in the way they think, interpret, and feed their own mind. You need to understand that whoever does not control the mind becomes a hostage to the moment. Now it starts becoming clear why so many people try to change their lives but remain trapped in the same cycle. Because the problem is not just on the outside, it is inside. It is in the way the mind interprets everything, repeats everything, and feeds everything. Some people lose the battle of the day before they even get out of bed, because they wake up already talking to their own fear, already reinforcing their own insecurity, already rehearsing defeat without realizing it. And this does not only happen to weak people. It happens to intelligent, talented, capable people who never learn to exercise control over their own inner world. Instead of leading their thoughts, they are led by them. Instead of filtering, they absorb everything. Instead of choosing clearly what deserves to stay within, they let the mind become a field without fences, where any idea enters, any voice settles in, and any bad memory begins to control the emotional climate of the day. And little by little, the person starts losing focus, losing direction, losing self-control, until they think the problem is just anxiety, a bad season, or too much going on. But an uncomfortable truth cannot be ignored. A mind without inner government turns any circumstance into a giant. And when the inside is disorganized, even a good opportunity looks like a threat. Even correction feels like an attack. Even a new beginning feels like too much risk. Think about your phone when too many apps are open at the same time. The battery drains, the device overheats, freezes, responds slowly, and sometimes you do not even understand why it is so slow. The mind works the same way. Some people are living with emotional tabs open all the time. Guilt from the past, fear of the future, comparison with others, unresolved anger, shame, need for approval, memory of failure, worry about money, feeling of insufficiency. How is that person supposed to have discipline, consistency, and alignment if they are mentally drained all the time? How are they supposed to walk with prudence if their thoughts already wake up accelerated and out of control? The problem is that many people have become so used to this internal noise that they think it is normal to live this way. They think it is normal to always imagine the worst. They think it is normal to create scenes of failure before even trying. They think it is normal to interpret silence as rejection, delay as defeat, difficulty as a sign they should give up. But that is mental training for losing. That is the mind being educated for self-sabotage. And the repetition of these thoughts creates invisible patterns so deep that the person starts calling it personality. That is just how I am. I overthink. I already expect it to go wrong. No, that is not identity. That is inner disorder repeated for too long. And whatever is repeated for too long begins to look like truth, even when it is only a habit. That is why biblical wisdom insists so much on guarding the heart and watching the inside. Because the heart there is not just loose emotion. It is the center of decision, perception, filter, intention. It is where mindset is formed. Proverbs is not talking about superficial care. It is talking about strategic protection. Whoever does not protect the mind hands their life over to autopilot. And a life on autopilot never reaches victory consistently because it reacts to everything and governs very little. Maybe you have already lived this without naming it. Someone says something simple, but you spend the whole day replaying it. A plan does not work out as expected, and you immediately conclude that nothing ever works out for you. You see someone else's progress, and suddenly your entire journey seems small. You make a mistake in one area, and then treat yourself like a complete failure. Do you see it? The event itself was small, but the interpretation caused huge damage. The ungoverned mind takes an event and turns it into a sentence, but wisdom is also knowing how to interrupt a narrative before it becomes destiny. It is looking at a thought and asking, is this true, or is this fear talking? Is this bringing me clarity or just pushing me into confusion? Is this helping me win or training me to give up? These questions seem simple, but they change the direction of a life. Because the thought you do not confront will sooner or later begin to command you, and whoever lives under the command of fear, comparison, and anxiety becomes a hostage to the moment, always reacting, almost never building. In practice, taking back government over the mind requires intentional action. It is not enough to say, I will think positively, because that is far too shallow. You need to develop a system of inner correction. For example, when you notice a recurring thought of defeat, instead of accepting it immediately, write it down. Put on paper what is going through your mind and confront it with facts. If your mind says, I never finish anything, do not accept it right away. Ask yourself where that started, what small things you have already sustained, and what kind of discipline you need to strengthen now. If your mind says, there is no point in trying, stop and replace that with a practical decision. What is the next small and clear step I can take today? That kind of training strengthens responsibility and dismantles the lie that you are forced to obey every thought you feel. You are not. Not every thought deserves a seat at your table. Not every emotion deserves a microphone. Not every interpretation deserves to become truth. And the more you learn that, the more you realize that control is not cold rigidity, but protection of what God wants to build in you. Because a governed mind produces peace to decide, focus to continue, and purpose to keep going even on difficult days. And then the next layer begins to show up strongly, even when the person already understands that they need to bring order to their thoughts. There is still another silent risk. Continuing to live, guided not by a renewed mind, but by what they feel in the heat of the moment. Have you noticed that your life is being guided by emotion, not by wisdom? There is a very common trap that destroys many people's construction without making noise, living depending on what they feel in the moment. And that seems harmless in the beginning, because the person does not even notice it. They just think they are being honest with themselves, respecting their time, waiting for the right moment. But deep down, something else is happening. They handed over the direction of their life to unstable emotions. If they wake up excited, they promise the world. If they wake up frustrated, they drop everything. If they receive praise, they move forward. If they meet resistance, they back off. If they feel peace, they continue. If they feel discomfort, they quit. And so they keep being led from one side to the other, like someone who does not have enough inner government to sustain what they decided when they were clear-headed. The problem is not feeling. Feeling is human. The problem is turning feelings into the highest authority, because emotion changes quickly. Today you feel courage, tomorrow you feel fear. Today you feel clarity, tomorrow you feel confusion. Today you feel like winning, tomorrow you feel too lazy to try. If your life obeys all of that without a filter, you will never build anything with consistency. You will live trapped between excitement and abandonment, promise and retreat, impulse and regret. And over time, that weakens the trust you have in yourself. After all, how can someone believe in their own word if they always abandon what they started as soon as their mood changes? This is the silent tragedy of those who live based on the moment. The person does not realize it, but they are training themselves to be unstable. They teach their own mind that discomfort is a signal to stop, that sadness is a sign of inability, that irritation is permission to react badly, that discouragement is justification to break discipline. But real life does not work like that. The greatest turnarounds are almost never born from an emotionally perfect day. They are born from small decisions sustained even when the heart is messy. This is where a strong analogy comes in. A house without walls. Imagine a beautiful house with a good structure, valuable furniture inside, but with no walls at all. Anyone can enter, any wind can bring disorder, any threat can come close. That is what happens when self-control is missing. The person may even have good values, good plans, even some level of wisdom, but without inner boundaries, any emotion invades and takes over. One day it is anger, the next neediness, then anxiety, then comparison, then frustration. And each of those emotions starts governing decisions that should be made with prudence, clarity, and alignment. Many people are not destroying their own lives through one major isolated mistake. They are destroying them through small, repeated emotional reactions, thoughtless responses, premature quitting, words spoken in the heat of the moment, choices made without peace and without reflection. Proverbs touches this point with impressive depth by showing that whoever rules their own spirit is worth more than someone who conquers cities. That changes the game because it dismantles a very common modern lie, that strength means winning on the outside. No, real strength is having control on the inside. It is being able to pause when everything in you wants to react. It is being able to remain when everything in you wants to run. It is being able to stay silent when you feel like exploding. It is being able to do what is right, even when your feelings are completely misaligned. And that is not coldness. That is maturity. That is inner government. That is a mindset trained not to kneel before impulse. Maybe you have already seen this pattern in real life. A person spends months building trust in a relationship, an opportunity, a project, and because of one misinterpreted conversation or one bad day, says what they should not, abandons the process, closes the door, reacts in pride, and then has to deal with the damage. Or else they know exactly what they need to do to move forward, but because they do not feel like it, they postpone it. And they keep postponing until the lack of action generates guilt. The guilt creates heaviness. The heaviness creates more discouragement, and the cycle repeats. This is more than disorganization. This is life being guided by emotion, not by wisdom. And when that happens, the person becomes a passenger in their own existence. They go wherever their mood takes them. They go wherever pressure pushes them. They go wherever the moment decides. But whoever wants victory cannot outsource their direction to temporary feelings. In practice, this adjustment begins when you decide that not everything you feel deserves to be obeyed. That sentence is simple, but freeing. Not every desire should become action. Not every pain should become a decision. Not every discomfort is a warning that something is wrong. Sometimes it is just a sign of growth. So start small and concretely. Before answering an important message, wait a bit if you are emotionally loaded. Before making a final decision, ask yourself, is this coming from clarity or from exhaustion? Is this direction or reaction? On sad days, do not make destructive promises. On angry days, do not make permanent decisions. On days of comparison, do not rewrite the value of your journey. Create pauses, create limits, create practices that strengthen your focus and your responsibility. Sometimes the most spiritual act of your day will not be feeling something intense, but simply not obeying a bad impulse. And the more you learn to do that, the more you realize that winning requires more than talent or intention. It requires internal stability. But there is one detail many people ignore. Even when they begin to organize the mind and hold back emotions, they can still keep losing strength for another silent reason. The environment around them may be feeding exactly what they are trying to overcome. I need to tell you, maybe you are surrounded by environments that weaken your victory. There are people who have already realized they need more control, more discipline, more self-control, and even so, they still cannot move forward. And then, that frustration hits. I already understand what I need to change, so why am I still stuck? Because there is a truth many people underestimate. No one builds a strong life while breathing a weak environment all the time. You may have good intentions, you may seek wisdom, you may even be trying to align your mindset, but if the environment where you live, talk, consume, and move every day feeds confusion, negativity, discouragement, and disorder, your construction becomes much harder. That does not mean you are too weak. It only means the soil around you may be sabotaging the seed. And many people do not notice this because they think environment only means physical place. But environment is much more than that. Environment is repeated conversation. It is emotional climate. It is consumed content. It is the kind of person influencing your vision. It is whatever normalizes your pattern. It is what shapes your direction without asking permission. Little by little, without realizing it, the person begins to lose clarity, lose focus, enter autopilot life again, and go back to calling a bad season what is often the result of the wrong company and the wrong exposure repeated for too long. Think of a healthy plant placed in bad soil. It may have potential, it may have life, it may carry beauty and fruit inside it, but if the soil is poor, if the light is wrong, if the water comes in a disordered way, that plant will weaken. Not because it was born defective, but because the environment is fighting against its development. That is what happens to a lot of people. They want a new life, but stay in the same circle that feeds the old invisible patterns. They want alignment, but remain surrounded by people who mock growth, despise prudence, live by impulse, and call irresponsibility authenticity. They want victory, but consume content all day that strengthens neediness, comparison, superficiality, anger, or escape. They want purpose, but they are surrounded by people with no direction, no hunger to grow, no responsibility for their own lives, and it is not always because of explicit malice. Sometimes it is simply because you are breathing emotional air that does not match the destiny you want to build, and that weighs on you. Because the environment does not need to destroy you dramatically to delay you. It only needs to make you lukewarm. It only needs to keep you distracted. It only needs to teach you to see as normal what should bother you. It only needs to make you accept as inevitable what could still be corrected. That is how many people keep losing strength without understanding where the weakening is coming from. The wisdom of Proverbs is very practical about this. When the text says that whoever walks with the wise will become wise, it is not giving you a pretty effect phrase. It is revealing a principle of formation. Little by little, you become similar to what most influences your inner world. You absorb vocabulary, reaction patterns, moral boundaries, vision for the future, tolerance for error, level of discipline, way of thinking, and even the way you justify your own life. That is why environment is so decisive. Iron sharpens iron, but iron can also wear iron down. The right company corrects, strengthens, awakens, confronts, and calls you upward. Wrong company drains, confuses, weakens, and makes you negotiate your inner government little by little. Maybe you have already lived this. You leave a conversation feeling heavier than when you entered it. You spend too much time around someone, and your mind begins to lose clarity. You consume a certain kind of content and feel your heart more restless, more comparative, emptier. Or you try to stay consistent, but the environment around you always pushes you back toward improvisation, excuse-making, and emotional laziness. And here comes an important confrontation. You are not always failing because of lack of ability. Sometimes you are insisting on staying in a place that weakens exactly what God is trying to strengthen in you. And while you do not discern that, you will keep fighting symptoms without touching the source. Because the wrong environment can stimulate self-sabotage without you even realizing you are being shaped. In practice, this requires serious review. Ask yourself, who most influences my behavior today? Who do I spend the most time with? Is what I consume every day strengthening my control or my chaos? Does my environment push me toward the center of my direction or drag me into dispersion? Maybe the change you need right now is not abandoning everything all at once, but beginning to make conscious adjustments, reduce certain conversations, limit certain access points, trade hours of noise for minutes of intentional silence. Draw closer to people who speak with wisdom, who live with prudence, who value correction and do not romanticize disorder. Sometimes you cannot immediately change your entire physical environment, but you can already change the mental environment you build inside yourself every day. And that already begins protecting your focus and your purpose. But even after adjusting environment, mind, and emotion, there is still a very treacherous layer that keeps many people in the same place. It is not only the big mistakes that destroy a life, but the small habits repeated without attention, almost invisible, that drain strength from the inside out. The problem is not only what you do wrong, it is what you keep repeating without noticing. Many people imagine that their lives are stuck because of one major mistake, one terrible choice, one isolated trauma, or one opportunity lost long ago. And of course, sometimes big events really do shape a path, but in most cases, it is not an explosion that keeps breaking a person's life. It is a leak. It is a silent repetition. It is that small pattern that seems harmless today, but when added up over weeks, months, and years, drains energy, clarity, money, time, self-respect, and sense of purpose. The problem is not only what you do wrong once in a while, it is what you normalized repeating. It is the constant delay in getting started. It is the repeated disorder that steals your direction. It is the habit of promising a lot and finishing little. It is the tendency to postpone what you know you need to face. It is the conversation you always repeat to yourself right before running from responsibility. And do you know what makes that so dangerous? The fact that these behaviors do not look destructive when viewed separately. One delay here, one distraction there, one well-crafted excuse, one break in discipline, one unfocused day, one half-hearted effort. None of that seems serious by itself, but together, those small points build a portrait. And over time, that portrait reveals something deep about your inner government. Because routine is not a detail, routine is revelation. It shows who is really in command of your life, you with wisdom, or your impulses with self-sabotage. Think of a water tank with a small leak. At first, no one panics. After all, there was no giant crack, no explosion, no collapse. But that is exactly the problem with a small leak. It works in silence. While the person pretends everything is under control, the reserve keeps getting lower. And by the time they finally notice, there is already no water left to sustain what needed it. That is how invisible habits work. Procrastination does not look like a monster when it lasts 20 minutes. Disorganization does not seem that serious when you think, "I will deal with that later." Lack of consistency does not feel so alarming when you convince yourself that tomorrow will make up for it. But the sum of those small permissions keeps teaching your brain to run from the right kind of weight, to avoid correction, to negotiate prudence, to break alignment for immediate comfort. And then the person starts living a very common cycle. They feel guilty because they are not moving forward, promise they will change, get motivated for 2 days, then return to the old pattern, and then use their recent failure as proof that they cannot do it. That is cruel, because it is not only the mistake that hurts, it is the repetition of the mistake without awareness. And the hardest part is that many people call this personality, "I am just disorganized. That is just who I am. I have never been disciplined." But no. In many cases, that is not identity. That is a trained pattern, and a trained pattern can be confronted, dismantled, and replaced. But first, it needs to be recognized by the right name. Proverbs deals with this with a clarity that is almost uncomfortable because it does not romanticize carelessness. When it speaks of the ant and contrasts diligence with laziness, the text is not just praising productivity. It is revealing a spiritual and practical principle at the same time. Whoever takes small actions seriously governs their own life better. Whoever despises the small compromises the great. Whoever lives only by intention, without organized action, keeps accumulating invisible losses until the crisis becomes too visible to ignore. That is why, "In all labor there is profit," is such a strong phrase, because it confronts the fantasy that thinking a lot, speaking beautifully, or dreaming big can replace execution. It cannot. Victory is not born from desire alone. Winning requires the right repetition. And here is a very important point. What you repeat every day is writing the future you will call destiny tomorrow. If you repeat delay, you will reap pressure. If you repeat dispersion, you will reap mediocrity. If you keep breaking your word to yourself, you will reap inner weakness. But if you repeat discipline, focus, responsibility, and small acts of control, you begin to form a new man, a new woman, a new foundation. Maybe it does not seem exciting at first. Maybe it even seems too simple. But that is exactly the secret many people ignore. Life's greatest changes almost always begin in decisions without applause, without an audience, without an epic feeling. They begin when you stop negotiating with what is silently draining your strength. In practice, this topic calls for concrete honesty. There is no use talking about transformation without identifying the specific pattern that is delaying your life today. So the question is not, where do I make mistakes sometimes, but what have I been repeating without realizing it is weakening me? It may be leaving everything until the last minute. It may be starting 1,000 things and finishing almost nothing. It may be going to sleep without planning the next day and waking up a hostage to chance. It may be spending too many hours consuming stimulation and then saying you cannot get clarity. It may be running from whatever requires sustained effort. Choose one pattern, name it, then replace it with an objective practice. If the problem is dispersion, define a block of uninterrupted time. If the problem is disorder, organize the basics before chasing big goals. If the problem is breaking promises to yourself, start by promising less and fulfilling more. That strengthens self-control. That builds a mindset of government. That takes you out of autopilot life. And little by little, you will realize a powerful truth. It was not just a great miracle that was missing, it was a new repetition. But now another necessary confrontation comes, because even when a person sees their patterns and knows what needs to change, many times they still stay stuck for a reason they resist facing. Deep down, they are still too in love with comfort to sustain the transformation they say they want. Many people want to win, but they are still in love with comfort. Here is a point that few people like to face, but it needs to be said clearly. There are people who say they want change, say they want victory, say they want a life aligned with purpose, but deep down they still protect their own comfort too much. And until that is confronted, almost nothing truly changes. Because growth hurts. Correction hurts, sustaining discipline hurts, breaking with old patterns hurts. But many people want the result without accepting the process that forms that result. They want to reap without sowing, want strength without training, want peace without order, want progress without rupture. The person may even talk about transformation, may even be moved by strong messages, may even recognize they need more control, more focus, more consistency. But when the time comes to do what is uncomfortable, they back away. And that retreat almost always comes dressed in a beautiful justification. Now is not the best time. When I feel better, I will start. I need to feel more certain. But many times that is not prudence. It is attachment to comfort. It is fear disguised as waiting. It is the soul trying to avoid the necessary tension that comes before any real maturity. And the more a person feeds that, the more they strengthen a mindset of immediate relief. The problem is that immediate relief rarely builds a solid future. Most of the time, it only preserves the cycle you already said you want to leave behind. Think of a person who wants to have muscles, strength, endurance, a firm posture. They can watch videos, buy workout clothes, talk about health, admire those who have already achieved results, even imagine what their own transformation would be like. But if they keep rejecting the discomfort of training, the tiredness of repetition, the good pain of formation, nothing changes. The body does not negotiate with intention. It responds to process. Life does too. Many people are waiting for the desire to show up before they begin, when in reality, desire often appears after the practice begins. That changes everything, because it breaks the illusion that first comes motivation, then comes action. Almost never. Many times, first comes the decision, then the resistance, then the repetition, and only then does a new strength begin to arise. That is why so many people remain stuck, not because they do not dream, but because they run from the emotional cost of building. They want to leave autopilot life, but they do not accept the discomfort of organizing their routine. They want more clarity, but cannot handle the silence necessary to hear themselves without distractions. They want more self-control, but keep feeding everything that weakens their boundaries. They want to break self-sabotage, but still think that saying, "I deserve to rest all the time," is self-care, when often it is escape. Rest is healthy, but excessive comfort can become a prison. And that prison is dangerous because it feels soft. There are no visible bars. There are only repeated delays, small compromises, sophisticated excuses, and a life that does not move forward. Proverbs confronts this theme very directly by showing that negligence leads to poverty, that the lazy person desires and accomplishes nothing, that there is a time to plow even when the climate does not seem ideal. That reveals something powerful. The soil of victory rarely opens up for those who only act when everything feels pleasant. Whoever wants to win needs to learn not to treat discomfort as an automatic enemy. Sometimes discomfort is exactly the field where God is training your inner muscles. Sometimes what you call a heavy season is the place where your inner government is being formed. And I know that is confronting, because all of us like predictable environments, easy tasks, quick rewards. But spiritual, emotional, and practical maturity almost always requires going through what is not pleasant in the beginning. It requires keeping the commitment even without applause. It requires saying no to yourself when the old pattern asks for one more concession. It requires prudence to see that today's discomfort may be tomorrow's liberation. Maybe you have already lived this in simple areas, that difficult conversation you avoided for weeks. But when it finally happened, it brought peace. That annoying organization that seemed small, but gave your direction back. That habit that felt exhausting at first, but later became a foundation. That is how life changes, not only through great spiritual moments, but through small, sustained acts of obedience. Comfort promises protection, but often delivers stagnation. The process demands effort, but frequently delivers alignment, strength, and wisdom. In practice, this topic calls for a very honest question. Where are you choosing comfort instead of growth? Where do you already know what you need to do, but keep postponing it because it will feel uncomfortable at first? It may be waking up earlier to regain focus. It may be stopping running from an important decision. It may be limiting a habit that steals your energy. It may be starting that routine you keep promising. It may be facing a conversation, a correction, a change in posture, a necessary renunciation. Choose one point, not 10. One. And treat that point as the training ground of your control. Because every time you consciously go through healthy discomfort, you strengthen your responsibility, your discipline, and your inner confidence. You prove to yourself that you are not a slave to the moment, and that is powerful. But there is still one last barrier holding many people back, even after understanding all this. Because there are people who even see their mistakes, even know they are seeking too much comfort, but still do not move forward because they developed a dangerous skill. The ability to justify everything so well that they never need to truly confront themselves. You do not win while you keep justifying everything. There comes a point when a person already knows a lot about themselves. They already understand they need more control. They already realize they lack discipline. They already noticed that certain environments weaken them. They already saw that invisible patterns are sabotaging their journey. But even so, they do not change. And why? Because they developed a very sophisticated skill, the ability to justify their own stagnation. They always have a ready explanation, a convincing context, a coherent narrative, an emotionally acceptable reason to remain as they are. And pay attention to this because there is a serious danger here. Over-justifying creates the feeling of self-awareness, but many times it is only well-articulated resistance. The person speaks beautifully about their own pain, explains their block in depth, tells every detail of what they lived through. And indeed, many things they went through may have been hard, unfair, and deeply impactful. But there comes a time when understanding the origin of the wound is no longer enough. There comes a time when continuing to explain yourself becomes a way of running from correction. And until that is confronted, there is no sustainable victory, because no one can overcome what they insist on protecting with excuses. It is hard to hear, I know, but there are moments when the truth needs to be more useful than comfortable. And the truth is that some people are not stuck only because of the past. They are stuck because they turned the explanation of the past into permanent permission not to change in the present. This shows up in very subtle ways. Sometimes the person blames the way they were raised. Other times, they blame the lack of support, the injustice they suffered, the lack of opportunity, the system, time, age, the environment, disappointment, fear, exhaustion, lack of recognition. And listen, some of these things are real. I am not denying anyone's pain. The problem begins when those realities stop being context and become identity. when limitation begins to be presented as the definition of who the person is, when difficulty becomes authorization to abandon purpose, when pain stops being a wound to be healed and becomes a fixed argument against any demand for responsibility. This is where a kind of pride lives that almost no one notices. Because pride is not only obvious arrogance. Sometimes pride is preferring to protect the ego rather than admit, I need to change. I am deceiving myself. I am using my pain as a shield. I am avoiding the mirror. And that is heavy, but it is freeing when it is finally recognized. Think of a broken mirror covered with a cloth. Covering the mirror does not fix the crack. It only prevents you from seeing the damage clearly. That is what justification does. It covers, it softens, it reorganizes the narrative so that you keep seeming coherent to yourself without having to touch the root. But the cloth does not heal. The cloth only delays, and everything that is delayed without treatment keeps deepening in silence. Proverbs is very direct when it shows that whoever hates correction is foolish, that listening to rebuke leads to life, and that covering transgression prevents prosperity. That reveals a very strong principle. There is no real growth without brutal honesty. Not that theatrical honesty that only confesses pain to receive comfort, but the kind that calls the problem by its name and accepts being confronted. That requires prudence, it requires clarity, it requires deep-level wisdom. Because recognizing error without destroying yourself is maturity. Receiving correction without running from it is strength. Admitting that certain excuses are past their expiration date is a sign of inner government. Maybe you have already seen this in yourself without wanting to admit it. The person knows they need to change a habit, but always says, "This week is too busy." Knows they need to take a stand, but says, "It is still not the right moment." Knows they are still in self-sabotage, but says, "I am in process." Knows they need more alignment, more focus, more consistency, but keeps treating their own disorder too gently. And the truth is simple. What you tolerate, you strengthen. What you justify, you prolong. What you refuse to name, you will hardly ever govern. That is why so many people remain trapped, not because they do not hear good messages, but because they still prefer elegant explanations over concrete transformation. And as long as the person keeps protecting their own image, they will not be able to consolidate a new character, because character is not born from beautiful speeches, it is born from accepted confrontation. In practice, this topic calls for hard but necessary questions. What am I still justifying? In what area of my life do I already know the truth, but still prefer to build narratives in order not to act? Where am I calling process what has already become a pattern of escape? This investigation needs to be done without self-pity and without self-hatred, only with truth. Maybe you need to write down what you keep repeating to yourself and confront it sentence by sentence. Maybe you need to listen to a mature person who will not feed your excuses, but strengthen your responsibility. Maybe you need to stop romanticizing weaknesses that should already be treated with more seriousness. Because there is a huge difference between having compassion for yourself and patting on the head what is destroying your direction. The first heals, the second delays you. And when you begin to abandon the justifications, something very powerful happens. Space appears for a new level of control, a new kind of mindset, a new way of living that no longer revolves around what happened to you, but around what you have now decided to govern within yourself. And this is exactly where the next step opens up powerfully, because after confronting excuses, the person is finally ready to understand the center of everything. Real victory does not begin when the world changes around you, but when you begin to govern yourself. Taking back control of life begins when you govern yourself. After all of this, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Taking back control of your life does not begin when circumstances change, when the people around you improve, when the money appears, when the environment becomes perfect, or when you finally feel ready. It begins when you decide to govern yourself. That is the central point many people spend years without understanding. Because most were trained to think that winning means first conquering something external, an opportunity, a position, recognition, an answer, an open door. But real life shows something else. There are people who even receive opportunities, but cannot sustain them because the inside is still in disorder. There are people who even reach something for a time, but lose it because they did not build enough self-control, discipline, prudence, and consistency to maintain what they conquered. So no, your greatest battle is not only against the world. In many moments it is against the lack of alignment within you. It is against a mind without clarity, a routine without direction, a heart without a filter, impulses without limits, an autopilot life that steals your strength in small portions. And here, there is a powerful freedom when you understand that the first territory to be governed is your inner world. You stop waiting for life to organize itself and start taking responsibility for what can be brought into order right now. That is where a new kind of strength is born. Not the loud strength of momentary enthusiasm, but the silent strength of someone who has started putting the inside of the house in order. Think of the image of a king inside his own palace. Outside, the kingdom may even be great. The walls may impress, the name may be known. But if inside the palace disorder, confusion, impulsiveness, and negligence rule, that government will not last. That is what happens in many people's lives. They want to govern great things outside, but still do not govern the time they wake up, the words they speak, the thoughts they feed, the impulses they obey, the environment they tolerate, the habit they repeat. They want influence, stability, victory, but have not yet consolidated inner government. And this is not to produce guilt, it is to produce awareness. Because external order is almost always the reflection of an internal order sustained long enough. That is why Proverbs points to trusting in the Lord, committing your works to Him, allowing Him to make your paths straight, and building the house with wisdom. Look closely. The text is not teaching spiritual passivity, as if it were enough just to desire and wait. It is calling you to cooperation. You trust, but you also put things in order. You pray, but you also correct. You surrender to God, but you also assume your role in the process. And that is beautiful, because it unites the spiritual with the practical. It unites faith with posture. It unites dependence on God with control over yourself. Many people separate those things, as if spirituality removed the need for structure. But in reality, mature spirituality strengthens mindset, focus, and the willingness to live with purpose even more. This is where the message stops being only psychological and becomes deeply spiritual, without losing real-life application. Because in the end, governing yourself is not only an exercise of human strength, it is also a response to God's direction. When you guard your mind, you are protecting a territory He wants to use. When you correct your routine, you are creating space so that your purpose is not swallowed by chaos. When you master impulses, choose your environments better, accept correction, break with self-sabotage, and practice consistency, you are not just becoming a better person in some generic sense. You are becoming someone more aligned with the wise way of living. And that changes everything. Because there comes a point when the person stops asking only for God to remove obstacles from the path and starts asking too, God, put order in me, correct in me what sabotages what you want to build. Give me clarity to see, prudence to decide, discipline to sustain, and self-control, so I do not lose myself to myself. That prayer is powerful because it does not outsource all the change. It recognizes that the grace of God does not cancel your participation. It strengthens your participation. And maybe that is what you needed to hear today. God is not only trying to take you to a new place. Many times, He is trying to form in you a new government, a new inner structure, a new firmness that matches the victory you desire so much. Because there are doors that can only be sustained on matured shoulders. In practice, this is the point where everything comes together. Guarding the mind, ordering the routine, protecting focus, choosing environments better, accepting correction without resistance, breaking old patterns, acting with consistency even without applause. All of that is part of the same movement, leaving disorder and entering alignment. And the more you do this, the more you realize that wisdom is not beautiful theory, it is lived direction. Control is not rigidity, it is government. Victory is not luck, it is construction. Winning is not an isolated event, it is the result of a life that stopped being directed by chaos and began to be led with intention, truth, and dependence on God. Maybe today you still have not changed every circumstance around you. Maybe some things will remain difficult for a while, but if something inside you has begun to come into alignment, then the turnaround has already started. Because every great external achievement has an invisible starting point. Someone decided no longer to be a hostage to their own inner world. And this is exactly where the perfect introduction is born, to tie all of this together at the beginning of the video. A strong, engaging, and confrontational opening, capable of touching pain, creating identification, and showing that many people's greatest problem is not lack of strength, but lack of government over their own life. Maybe for a long time you believed the problem was lack of opportunity, lack of support, lack of luck, lack of recognition. But deep down, what was holding you back was not absence of value, it was absence of government. Because many people are not losing in life because they are incapable, weak, or destined for failure. They are losing because they let life run without direction, without vigilance, without correction, without self-control. And when that happens, everything begins to slip through their hands. Focus is lost, mindset weakens, invisible patterns take control, life goes on autopilot, and the person starts reacting more than building. But now, you have already seen something many people spend years without understanding. A victorious life is not born by accident. It is born when there is clarity within, wisdom in choices, discipline in habits, prudence in decisions, and consistency on the path. That is how alignment begins to replace chaos. Taking back control of your life does not mean controlling everything around you. It does not mean everything will happen exactly the way you want, when you want. It means something deeper. Stopping a life lived without awareness. Stopping outsourcing the direction of your life to mood, fear, the environment, the past, or other people's opinions. It means taking responsibility for what you think, what you decide, what you repeat, and what you feed inside yourself. And when that begins to happen, the change stops being superficial. It begins from the inside out. First, your inner government changes. Then your posture changes, then your focus changes, then your choices change, and then little by little your life changes. Because whoever learns to govern themselves stops being dragged by disorder and begins to walk with purpose. And this may be the day when everything begins to come back into alignment again. If this video spoke to you, comment, "I take back control of my life." Subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who needs to start governing their own life again.